to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today, we want to bring you a subject that we have been dealing with for the past 12 months over a period of time, and this is under a grant that has been received from the Association for the Humanities in Idaho in cooperation with the Kootenai County Council on Alcoholism. Our topic, as you know, over the past year has been alcohol and human values. In those past months, we have brought you 6 programs dealing with various areas of that subject. Today and next week, we shall bring you programs number 7 and 8 dealing with the subject of alcohol and youth. In order to discuss this very important topic, we wish to welcome to our program Betty Marsh, who is a specialist in early alcohol education with Seattle University's Alcohol Studies program. Mrs. Marsh has 10 years experience in classroom programs for alcohol education, and her materials are currently being used in 700 classrooms in the Seattle area. Mrs. Marsh, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
As has been true of the other programs, we wish to welcome back 3 panel members that are involved with this grant, and those people are Jim McLeod, Tim Christie, and Judy Sildy. We shall start the questioning with Jim McLeod.
Thank you, Tony. Betty, how prevalent is drinking among the young these days? We hear a lot of reports that suggest that alcohol or drinking among the young is at epidemic proportions now. Would you agree with that estimate?
Heartily. It's very hard for anyone, parents, schools, the public, to realize that we're having a problem with 6th and 7th grade children. If you walk into a school, you'll find them running around with their small bottles of wine and booze, and lunchtime is usually spent at someone's home where the parents are gone with some kind of beer party or something similar to that. The frightening thing about it to me, as it was mentioned, I have met with 700 classes over a period of 10 years, and I must say, met with is not lecturing them, it is theirs. It's open discussion and it belongs to them, and this is really why it has been successful. And it is unbelievable, the extent of the drinking. The frightening thing to me is that every year that I have gone back into the schoolroom, what I said was true for 6th grade last year will be true for 5th grade this coming year.
Tim Christie.
Well, Betty, how does that compare with 10 or 20 years ago?
Oh, no way. Absolutely no way. When I first started this timidly, maybe almost 11 years ago, because I didn't know exactly where I was going and what I wanted to know, they were very embarrassed. And I'll say that about community college level, 12th grade students. They were embarrassed to talk about alcoholism, problem drinking, the alcoholic. And slowly, over a period of years, it has changed to the point where at first it's okay to drink, now it's okay to be drunk, and now it's all right to be an alcoholic.
Judy Sildy.
Okay, so you are saying then that drinking is starting at a younger age than ever before, and we see this, the age declining more and more all the time. Is that so?
Oh, true. We have 12, 13, 14 years old for the last, I would say, almost 3 years, completely full-blown alcoholics that we have had in and out of treatment, and many of them who have successfully recovered.
I've read statistics that indicate that more than half of those kids who drink fairly heavily by the time they're in high school start before they're in 7th grade. Does that seem about right to you?
Yeah, as I said 6th grade last year. God forbid that it will be 5th grade when I go back.
Jim McLeod.
Are there any particular groups of young people who are more prone to drink than others, or is it just across the board from all social levels and so on?
That's very difficult. I have thought one way and then the other over a period of time, and your mention that it's across the board really seems to be the accurate judgment.
So there's no specific social group that seems to be the children come from?
I really don't find it to be so anymore. Of course, the children who come from the more affluent families find it easier to acquire the drinking and easier to get the money for it and the supply. and the time to drink is more available to them because usually their parents are never home or very busy with their own activities.
Tim Christie.
Okay, Betty, I think it's important at this point to probably make a distinction between drinking and drunkenness. And I guess my question at this point now is, do you see drinking as you say, is on an increase, but is drunkenness among teenagers being more, is it more prevalent as with drinking, and is it more acceptable?
Yeah, and I'll say yes. I hate to say this, but it really is yes and no. I did an experiment over a period of 6 months with the community colleges and the universities, and this started with the boys coming back from the service. They immediately went to school and went to work, both. I noticed it with my own sons that the social drink has gone by the boys. They don't have the time for it anymore. So what they are doing, and now your 7th and 8th graders have picked this up, they get their beer, their, what do you call it, the case.
The keg?
The keg. They get their kegger on a Friday night, and because they have to pay for it and they're stuck for another 24 hours if they don't return it, they drink it. They drink it all. They don't know what it is like anymore to just sit down and have a social drink with someone, a drink before dinner, drink in the evening. They don't have the time, and they've lost the knowledge of that kind of drinking.
Okay, so in other words, what you're saying is that the people are not impulse drinkers or social drinkers, but they're very much oriented towards drunkenness per se. Drink it all at one time and then they may abstain for a long time?
Well, I really think this is going through the general public, and even though you didn't ask me that, I noticed it in the cocktail lounges and the dinner clubs, because drinking is so expensive that now people will toss off 2 in a hurry rather than sit there over 1 all night because they want a nice little buzz on. And more people are getting drunk because of the cost. This is true.
Okay.
It has a lot to do with it.
Okay, one more step.
Surely.
Do you think, all right, in terms of the drunkenness then, is there more drunkenness per se? I mean, you say there's more people drinking.
Right.
Is the frequency of drunkenness increasing? For example, Saturday night as opposed to now Saturday, Wednesday, and Thursday night. Do you see that happening?
Simply because it's more acceptable. Unfortunately, the kids, and I'll talk about preschool level, I'll talk about a 3- and 4-year-old who get their ideas from the soap operas, from television, and how often do you see a half-hour program where someone isn't offering someone a drink? And the soap operas, of course, if you have ever watched them over and over again, this is the thing they're applying. Anybody who walks in the door to have a drink, and the little ones pick it up at the age of 3 and 4. They know all about it before they ever come to school.
Judy Sildy.
Yeah, let me just ask one more follow-up to that. Nearly half of all teenagers who drink report that they've been drunk at least once, according to the latest statistics that I've seen. And that compares with only 19% of them 10 years ago, if I remember correctly. Something like 10% report that they get drunk at least once a month, and about half of those say that it's at least once a week. Do those statistics seem about right to you?
I think they're very mild. I can only speak for the ones I've been involved in, and I think they're very mild, mostly because they probably haven't told anybody or told on each other about how many times it actually happened.
Wishful thinking, in
Right.
other words. Why do you suppose this is true? It's a very broad question, but why do you suppose so many young people are drinking these days, and drinking more than they were a generation ago or even 10 years ago?
Well, we live in a society that flows with alcohol, and everybody does it, and it has come to be the acceptable thing. Every advertisement that you see, actually, the movies, the advertisements, their television shows, this is the way it is. Everybody is supposed, that's the great American myth, everyone is supposed to be able to drink.
What about reasons in the individual youngster, looking not so much taking the broad sociological viewpoint, but just an individual, kid, young kid, 13, 14-year-old? What sort of things, what sort of reasons do you run into commonly that might cause a kid like that
One
to start
thing that
drinking?
opens the door to it is that usually the first legal drink a child will have is from their own family. Now, as most of you do know, you can offer your own child a drink anytime. You can't offer someone else's, but your own child you can. And usually it will be a family affair, probably a wedding and probably 6th, 7th grade, where it's the first time that they have officially been offered a drink. And surprisingly enough, it opens up a whole world to them. There they are, all at once, with the drink in hand, and they look around, and here it is. It's legal. Their own parent gave it to them. It's respectable. Look at all these neat people with the drink in hand. It is socially acceptable. This is a social affair. But one thing that nobody ever told them, it can be used openly in a sharing situation, and no other drug can compete with that. And all at once you see this is everything they've ever seen, television, the glamour, the drama, the sophistication, and every child who has that first drink truly expects to be a social drinker.
So you're saying that essentially it's just an important rite of passage in growing up.
True, sure.
Are there any specific things you could point to in our culture you feel contribute to this problem as well? Any pressures in our culture on young people that contribute to this? Is the pace of living in modern life such that they feel more the need to escape from I guess, the future, or our economic circumstances, inflation, foreign affairs? I guess I could go through a long list of things, but
It's true.
I'm probably answering the question for you, I guess, rather than letting you
Well,
answer
in a
it
way,
for me.
Jim, but they are following the example of what they see. It actually flows with alcohol. The churches have champagne breakfast, 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning. A family breakfast, 9:30 on a Sunday morning, champagne. All of us are involved in just about any social affair. And the kids tell me, and this is from preschool level, the first thing that's important anytime there's a social affair is what kind of liquor are we going to have, and let's make sure it's enough. The family feels crucified if they are caught without liquor in the house. And the kids tell me over and over. Now, this is funny because over a period of years, I hear the same thing, you see, from different classes, different times. If someone would stop in to visit, and God forbid they have no liquor in the house, mother runs in to entertain them while father slips out the back door to go down to the liquor store, because you're not supposed to be caught without something to drink. And here we come to the big one, because something to drink means alcohol. The kids know there's milk, fruit juices, pop, 1,000 things, but a drink, if a family has to say, I'm sorry, we don't have anything to drink, it means alcohol. And that's the biggie, right from the word go. They know how big that must be.
What kind of effect does our society's ambivalence towards alcohol? Because you've already alluded to that. What kind of effect does that ambivalence have on the teenager very specifically?
They don't believe us. We tell them all, we'd say, if you drink, nobody will like you, right? If you get drunk, you won't have any friends. They look at their parents, and they look at the neighbors, and they look at the relatives. They say, If you drive the car, if you get drunk, you can't have the car anymore, right? Well, here again, over and over, the kids tell me 2 or 3 times, and they got half bunned, and the parents said, 3rd time, you can't have the car again. Their parents drink, mind you. The kids are coming home from a party, coming up the driveway, half loaded. They see the light go out in the bedroom. The parents admitted. I have done 50 parent groups, and the parents admitted. They do not know how to confront the kids because they drink. And they're ambivalent about their own drinking.
So the parents' ambivalence in terms of the child's drinking is really,
Right,
you think,
it makes a lot of difference, yes.
Judy Silvey.
What about parents who aren't too ambivalent about their drinking? I mean, there are some. Haven't there been studies of the effect of, say, an alcoholic parent versus a teetotaling parent, or in a more general sense, a background, a social or cultural background that's heavily predisposed toward drinking as opposed to one where drinking is strongly condemned? Is there some sort of correlation between that and the trouble
Surely.
that a kid is likely to get into with his
Surely.
drinking?
The most shocking part of this is that we have children who are 12 and 13 years old now who are cutting out from the home. They're saying, I don't have to put up with this, I don't have to live like this. And when they leave, they're taking all the problems along with them, plus the fact that they have resolved nothing about alcohol. And so if there is an alcoholic parent in the home, the child inevitably will go one way or the other. Either they will have nothing to do with alcohol, they are so disgusted with it, or they fall into the same pattern that was in the home, but they have learned nothing about themselves and alcohol. So we lose either way.
What about the opposite extreme? What about families in which drinking is very strongly condemned, or perhaps not even just in the family because of a particular religious background, or, you know, it's a fairly well-known fact that some social groups just drink and some don't. What about so-called Bible Belt kids, for
Well,
example?
We have people dealing with youth groups from the Baptist, the Chinese, and the Jewish now, and they all have their own groups. That answers one question. And the other one is, which the parents tell me over and over again, what are they to do? They feel if they don't have it in the home, the kids will go someplace else and drink. This is a very typical parent problem. If they serve it in the home, the kids only get to like it so much, and then they'll have a problem. But underneath it all, as a parent, I believe the real thing is that if our kids do something, you know, silly, tragic, or irrevocable, it makes us look like very bad parents, and I think that has a lot. But I can answer your question because I was really set back on my heels. You know, dealing with the kids, if you can't be honest, you're wasting your time. They don't want to hear from you. And so this one was posed to me, 3 7th grade boys. You know, they have been friends since 1st grade, which is most unusual for 3. They all live in the same parish, and their parents are all active in the same church, but not socially acquainted. Okay, Johnny, they said to me, okay, Mrs. Marsh, you tell me what you think. Johnny's parents will not have alcohol in the house. They believe it is morally wrong. Henry's parents have wine with dinner, maybe a drink now or there. Joe's family are swingers. Dinner's 2 and 3 hours late every night in the week. Weekends are just drunken brawls. But these kids in a 7th grade class said to me, okay, Mrs. Marsh, who's right and who's wrong? Because we bring kids up to think someone has to be right, so someone must be wrong. They think they're nice people. They think their parents are nice people. What's the answer?
Mrs. Marsh, while we've been dealing with the reasons for this problem, Tim Christie and I were discussing this prior to the program. We have a lot of literature that is dealing with the question that you're dealing with, and they're not in agreement, though. You've dealt with some of the environmental problems or psychological problems, and we could expand that to the family breakup and job problems or school problems, so forth. But my question really is based upon the fact that there's also a school of thought that it can be a genetic problem, that it can be inherited and so forth. How do you stand on this issue? Is it one or the other? Is it an environmental problem, a genetic problem, or is it both? Do you have any information on that?
The closest I can come to that is, Jim and I were talking on the way here, we are learning, but we really don't know as yet why one person can drink safely and another can't. As far as genetics go, we are coming closer and closer to proving this to be true. And I believe any alcoholic, any recovered alcoholic would be wise if their children never did drink. We have no guarantee. We have cases where it may have skipped a generation. It could be everybody in 3 generations in a row. It could be 1 out of 3 generations. But obviously genetics have much to do with it. Chemistry, individual chemistry seems to play a great part of it.
So we have enough evidence to indicate that some people are more susceptible if they drink to becoming alcoholics than others would be.
I believe this is, well, and also Dr. Jim Smith, who's director of Shadles in Seattle, says that he believes anybody who drinks enough, long enough, could become an alcoholic.
Regardless of who it was.
Right.
Tim Christie.
In one point to go on with that, in terms of drinking long enough, etc., as far it's my understanding that the consumption among teenagers as far as alcohol has been increasing every year, not only the incidence but the consumption of it. Do you find that to be true?
Well, this is true, and of course you must remember at the beginning, anyone who is prone to an alcohol problem has a greater capacity than someone who is not, your so-called social drinker.
Okay, how many of these people run into serious consequences with their drinking?
Well, often it is covered up. A family will say, well, the kids were just having a good time, you know, and actually they didn't hurt anything, they just ran through the back of the garage or, you know, something like that. But you see, yeah, this is true, a lot more. And I have found out I don't have statistics, I don't deal in statistics, but anything that I say is only what I know to be true personally. And in a classroom, it really is funny because kids are so disloyal. When you talk about the kid who drinks more than anybody else, you know, everybody in the room points them out. But it is much more than people would be willing to accept, much more than the kids like to think themselves. They like to think they're just having a good time.
What do you see as some of the most serious consequences of teenage or youth drinking?
The fact that we just need to get to them with early education and get them to accept the early warning signs, which we are learning as we go along. And for them, we can offer them the wonder that they will never have to go through what the former alcoholics had to go, because they will know soon enough that they really should not drink.
Judy Silvey.
Yeah, Betty, I was reading a statistic just the other day that, of course, the statistics don't all agree that much, but I've read this one in several places that I believe it's 3.3 million high school or younger age kids in this country right now are classified as problem drinkers as opposed to just habitual drinkers or whatever. How would you define a problem drinker? In other words, what kinds of problem does drinking create for young people?
I think that if you look around, even among the people you know, everyone will find people who should not drink. It really has nothing to do with alcoholism. I'm sure you know somebody who will fall asleep after they've had one or two drinks, someone who gets very nasty after a few drinks. And with the kids, you see, they don't consider this problem, because if you remember back when the other drugs were so prevalent, people were saying to parents, now you watch your child. If your 13-year-old wants to go hide in their bedroom and play loud music and cries unexpectedly and just acts mean and belligerent, you better watch them. Well, you know, every 13 and 14-year-old acts this way anyhow. So that's the truth. So it is very hard to tell, and it takes such a long time for a problem to be noticeable. We have had full-blown alcoholics and have been going on for 2 or 3 years, when the kid finally did something about it and the parents refused to accept it. They both worked. They said, I know this can't be true, not our kid. We let him have a couple of drinks at dinner time.
So you're saying social and family problems
We
certainly
don't want
would be
to
one big
recognize
kind.
it, you know. We just don't want to recognize it. And as you mentioned, the difference between drunkenness, you know, there are many people in this world who will get drunk on a Saturday night. You see, they intend, or New Year's Eve, but they don't have to get drunk. They don't get drunk when they don't want to get drunk. They don't have to have a drink, and that is the great divider. And with the children, the problem drinker we see labels himself or herself when they can't have a good time unless the drink is included. This is the first big clue that we have.
What about legal problems with drinking?
With young people,
Yes.
this is really wild, because here again the parent comes to the foremost and runs down to court. Now, I've been in court where a kid has been there and someone has almost been killed because this kid left a party, he was driving, and his friends all come and they say, well, I just don't understand that. He only had 3 drinks and he was feeling just fine when he left the party, because they have no comprehension of the buildup of alcohol over a period of time. And so the father and the father's lawyer get the kid off, you know, and they say, well, you know, and he just got into a scrape this once, and any kid will do that. And so it is minimized, unfortunately.
Jim McLeod.
I'd just like to pursue this business of definition a little further, since you define problem drinker. How about teenage alcoholic, or perhaps I shouldn't even say teenage, because obviously there could be younger youngsters involved in this too. What's the fine line between those two, problem drinker and alcoholic, and how do you cross that?
Well, I guess the fine line is when they have to have that. They have to have that. They are hooked.
Actual addiction, then.
They are actually addicted, and they can't guarantee what they will do when they drink. They cannot. They're really, really set in a hard way, because once they can't quit like other people can walk in and have 1 or 2 drinks. Much as they intend to, they can't do it. Any alcoholic has the same problem, but this is the beginning of addiction. They can't guarantee their behavior when they drink. Now, this is what kids will report about other kids that they notice. And of course, sometimes, like one bunch of kids said they went to a party. These were 6th graders, and of course the family wasn't home. And it was their first beer party, and this, we'll call him Joe, had 3 or 4 beers, and he was the funniest thing they ever saw. And they said, gosh, next time you have a party, be sure to have him, because he really makes a party move. So the next time they had a party, Joe came and he had his 3 beers. He threw up on the rug, his girlfriend's rug. He got in a fight. The girlfriend's mother said, don't ever bring that kid around again. The girl says, I want nothing more to do with you. And his friends were disgusted with him, and nobody understood anything at all about this, why it was so. Because the inexperience of drinking has a lot to do with it.
Tim Christie.
In terms of our pressures as far as drinking and that is concerned, how much effect and all of these problems and everything else, how much of it has stemmed from the well, not necessarily overreaction, but reaction by parents to the drug movement, that the value that I'd rather have my son or daughter drunk than I would having them smoking marijuana or using LSD or something like that. How much correlation do you see as far as the reaction to drugs as opposed and the approval of drinking?
The other drugs, you mean?
Yeah, the other drugs,
Yeah,
right.
because alcohol is
I-
a drug. This is
right.
something that even some of the kids, I'll talk about 14, 15-year-old kids are amazed when you say other parent groups are amazed. A drug? They had no idea. A while back, I think so, but now people are becoming more educated about alcohol. And so unfortunately, we've just added another worry to them. Now, a little knowledge. They know something's wrong and they're not quite sure what to do about it.
Do you still hear the fact, though, that I'd rather have my son drinking beer than going out and smoking marijuana?
Well, marijuana, because nothing conclusive has come out, you see, and then the kids lamb on to anything, and all that says there's nothing wrong with marijuana. In the classroom discussions that I've done many times, they bring up the subject of marijuana and want me to discuss it, and I say, no way, I have enough to do with alcohol, I just won't have anything to do with it. I can't get sidetracked that way, I don't know enough about it. But it doesn't come up as often as it used to. And of course, the difference in alcohol and the other drugs, with alcohol, you know what you get. You know, that marijuana, the kids, somebody was chewing up rubber bands and putting them in, selling them, you know. The other drugs, somebody was selling aspirin outside of junior high school for $1 a throw. Sure, but, right, but with alcohol, you see that there's just no mistake, there's no error. If you get into a problem with alcohol, you have 3 choices. You know, you become insane, you die, or you learn to live without drinking. I mean, you become insane because your brain cells have been so badly used that you cannot manipulate anything anymore.
I must close with that. We're out of time. And ladies and gentlemen, we will be back with Betty Marsh next week at the same time when we'll continue to discuss alcohol in youth. At that time, we'll deal with the responses to the problem. I hope you'll be with us. Until then, have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time. Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today we wish to have part 2 of our program that we started last week entitled Alcohol in Youth. We particularly wish to deal with the responses to the problem of alcohol in youth. We're able to do this through a grant that was given by the Association for the Humanities in Idaho in cooperation with the Kootenai County Council on Alcoholism. The entire program is entitled Alcohol and Human Values. In order to continue our discussion, we wish to welcome back to our program Betty Marsh, who is a specialist in early alcohol education with Seattle University's Alcohol Studies program. Mrs. Marsh has 10 years' experience in classroom programs for alcohol education, and her materials are currently being used in over 700 classrooms in the Seattle metropolitan area. Mrs. Marsh, welcome back to our program.
Thank you.
Coming back to involve themselves with the questioning of our guest are 3 faculty members at North Idaho College that are involved in administering this particular grant from the Association for the Humanities in Idaho. Our panel includes Jim McLeod, Tim Christie, and Judy Silty. We shall start the questioning with Jim McLeod.
Betty, it's my understanding that alcohol is the leading cause of death among the young. I know for a fact in North Idaho, for instance, in traffic fatalities, that it is the leading cause of death. Why, if that's the case, don't we seem to care more about it than we do? I notice that there are many parents and so forth involved in bike-a-thons and campaigns to raise money to fight multiple sclerosis and so on. There just seems to be so little that people are really doing actively about this. Is it ignorance or apathy or what?
I really think that we are a nation of disbelievers. We just don't believe anything bad can happen to us. If you remember some time ago, they used to run films of horrible car accidents to high school students who, before they got their driver's ed. And if you saw a bad accident on the highway, I'm sure you might slow up a little bit. But do you ever know anybody who got out of the car and said, I'm never going to get behind the wheel again? And so nobody believes this can really happen to them. And if you talk to hundreds of recovered alcoholics, as I have, each one of them will tell you that over a period of time, there was the same statement: boy, if I ever got as bad as he is, I sure would quit drinking. But by that time, it is too late, and no one ever expects to get into a bind. We're optimistic, I suppose.
Tim Christie.
As an alcohol educational specialist, what do you think about the state of public awareness as far as alcohol is concerned? Is it getting better, or are we still as ignorant as we always have been in many cases as far as the problems of alcohol and the power that alcohol has over people?
I believe it's inevitable that everyone has come to the conclusion that they know someone with a drinking problem or someone who drinks too much, whatever that means. And actually, I have discovered you never have the wrong audience when alcohol is the subject. Never. When I first started at Seattle University, the symposium of the alcohol studies was usually for recovered alcoholics or people who were going to work in the field. Now, each quarter, we close registration 2 or 3 days after it opens, and we have completely mixed bags: psychiatrists, clergy, teachers, nurses, doctors, because everyone knows now that it is involved somewhere in their life, or it is going to be in their profession. We can't escape that any longer.
Do you think the general American public, the person who sits in front of a television in the evening with their family, are they aware? I mean, the professional people, the psychiatrists, the clergy, and things like that, they're going to have to deal with the problem. They obviously have some intuitive need to find out this information. But what about the grassroots of America, the people that go down to the bar on Friday night and have a drink? Are they aware of all the problems that alcohol creates and the problems of alcoholism in our society?
This is the big one, and this is the first hopeful sign, the early warning sign that we have that really seems to make sense to the kids. Anyone who is going to drink more and more as time goes on is forced to hang around with people who drink as they do. This has to be the beginning, because as you know, otherwise other people who don't drink as you do are a bore to you, and you're a bore to them if you're always the one who wants an extra drink when everybody wants to go home. And so this is the beginning of distinction.
Judy Silvey.
Okay, Betty. One possible response to the problem of alcoholism that is often suggested is to pursue some sort of legal remedy for the situation. Raising the drinking age, I know that's something legislation has passed in several states in the last year or two to raise it back up to 19, 20, 21 years of age. Or there's a lot of talk about toughening up on penalties, so on and so forth. What's your opinion of the effectiveness of these kind of legal remedies?
Well, we have tried some of everything, and as far as I can determine, the extent of the drinking in your community it's really decided by the acceptance of your community. That has a lot to do with it. And your only other recourse would be law. We tried that, and as you know, that didn't work. It would be cost. You can raise the price all you want to, and anyone who is going to drink is going to pay the price. The legal age limit for the kids, that doesn't bother them in the least. They can always find someone. They've laughed about that. They can always find somebody to buy it for them. That has never been a problem. So the only thing we have left to work with is attitude about alcohol, and of course that is education, and this is really what we're after.
Jim McLeod.
Betty, education would seem to be a very important approach to this particular problem, and my feeling is, and I don't have any special expertise here to back this up, but that our traditional approach has been to use the high school health class as a vehicle for trying to inform young people about the dangers of alcohol and so on. How effective has this approach been to this problem, and what do you see as being the major shortcomings?
Well, you touched on something I'm very sensitive about, because I was part of the original presentation about alcohol in the classroom. When I started in the field 16 years ago, there was almost a health education week in the public school system, and so alcohol had to be included. And the teachers would go to the community and say, anybody who knows anything about alcohol, please come into my classroom, right? And at this time, the prevalent idea was to tell them the dangers of alcohol, the terrible things that would happen, to the extent that I would stand in front of the classroom and I would say to Judy, like, if you were having a beer bust tonight, you know, that's okay because you wouldn't have to worry. But Jim, if you were, you might be an alcoholic in 30 years. And you can imagine how well this went over with the kids. And in fact, I did it twice, and I was very uncomfortable about it. And the second time, there were two boys sitting in the front row, and their eyes just slid to each other with that, get her. And I thought, that's it. There has to be a better way. And this was really how I began to become interested. And so our approach is, we know the early warning signs, and I personally feel that this is so hopeful to give the kids an idea of how it can change their whole style of living, and to keep them informed as we learn along the way. You know, I share everything I know. In fact, in the last 2 years, junior and senior high school classes, I share with them everything that is being done in the state of Washington about alcohol, what is being done across the country, but mostly in their own state and county and city. And this is much more important to them and much more interesting. And I think I have a few recruits going into college who might turn up in our field. But I just think you have to act with what you have to work with. And actually the thing that has really disturbed me is that alcohol is bad. There's nothing wrong with the product. Nothing wrong with the product. It's the abuse and the misuse that we are after. And this, of course, is what education can do.
I think that's an important point, because too often I think that we concentrate on just the negative aspects of alcohol, and certainly I think that there are certain positive ones. I was reading an article today at the airport when I was out to pick you up, as a matter of fact, which was indicating that people who drink moderately live longer than those who abstain or those who drink heavily, and that actually there's some evidence that in the case of heart functioning, that this is a good thing to drink moderately, like 1 or 2 ounces a day, but not to drink excessively. And I think that's an important point you're making.
Surely, and of course, we come around to the fact that anybody who does everything in moderation has a better chance of survival.
Tim Christie.
What do you think about some of the new approaches to alcohol education? For example, the peer group, the kids teaching the kids, those kinds of things that have been in the news lately. Are they successful, or are they kind of the fad of educators, or that kind of thing?
Well, some of everything. We have had some that were quite successful, depending on educating the peer group, their attitudes, their own personal beliefs and attitudes. A few years ago in Phoenix, someone had a wonderful idea, and they had 5th grade kids and 8th grade mothers, and they were going to, and the kids did not belong to those mothers. They felt that was much better. And they did a 6-week series and exchanged information about alcohol, and they dropped it because it was an embarrassment to find out that the mothers knew much less than the kids knew about it. But it has to be a learning experience for whatever peer group you're going to use. You can't just jump in because it's somebody that they would listen to. In Seattle now, they are trying, and they've been successful the last year, with the important sports people. And it just has happened that a handful of them don't drink anyhow, and are very interested in it, and they seem to carry a little weight because sports are a big thing with high school.
Okay. Do peers seem to have more impact than adults telling children, kids, whatever the case may be,
At a
teenagers?
certain stage, I mean, anybody who has children, you know that you reach the stage where you don't know anything. You know, when you're the most wonderful person in the world until they get to about third or fourth grade, and then, you know, their schoolmates and their neighbors and everybody else knows more. And so here again, in between this time, then when they back to third year in college, I find personally is the hardest thing. You know, when the parents know nothing and the kid knows everything. And this again, I find, is a great time for peer groups, and these are the ones that have been successful across the country. In fact, Amherst University has a fantastic campus program that is run by the students.
Judy Silty.
Okay, well, I certainly agree with you that the old scare tactic approach has not been particularly useful. I can remember my days in junior high and high school myself, where we'd be practically rolling in the aisles at some of the literature and the films that we saw. They seemed like bad soap opera, I think. I've heard a lot lately that suggests that perhaps a more productive approach to take is to assume that since we cannot, or at least we've not in the past been very effective teaching the youngsters not to drink, that a better approach is to teach them how to drink, to teach them to drink responsibly, more or less. As a matter of fact, I know that the liquor industry has been behind a fairly extensive advertising campaign with the same notion. There are a couple things I wonder. Number one, what your feeling is about how the public seems to feel about that notion. I can imagine that there would be a fairly serious hue and cry about that sort of thing, just judging from public response to other things like sex education and so on. And then my second question is, how do you feel about it, the effectiveness of that particular approach to alcohol education?
Well, that's a sore spot with many of us, because we did talk about responsible drinking for quite a few years, and it seemed the light went on all at once, and we began to realize some people are in trouble with alcohol the first time they ever tasted. Now, how can they be responsible about their drinking? And it is such a devious, baffling subject, because many people drank for 20, 25, 30 years before they ever got in trouble with alcohol. So if you wanted to call them responsible drinkers, if you would have to go back and look at them through those years and see what they were really doing. And so Father James Royce, in fact, has a little booklet that is out and is available to anyone for $1 called Responsible Drinking, that everybody should have. And we learned slowly that there's a fallacy in this, because unfortunately many people have become alcoholics because that's what they were trying to do. They were determined to be a responsible drinker, and that they just couldn't do it, and by that time they were really going down the drain.
So you're saying that responsible drinking is an illusion, or just that it's something that's not possible for some to do?
Well, we could come back to what Jim said. You know, we're talking about moderation. I have found this to be the great difference in your so-called social drinker. If you start questioning people you know, somebody that you notice that takes one drink like over a period of 5 or 6 hours, and you say to her, and she'll tell you maybe yesterday, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, she had too much to drink and she got up the next day and felt rotten, and it wasn't worth it. The pleasure wasn't worth the pain, and that was it as far as she's concerned. So you can see how much more we have to learn, because she is the one who would never take more than that 1 or 2 drinks, whether it's New Year's Eve or her anniversary or birthday. And this may be something to do with what separates the person from a heavy drinker.
Betty, do you, in your work with people who, I assume some of them already have very serious drinking problems, and you talk to others in an educational way, do you attempt to get at some of the reasons that may be environmental in nature or psychological? In other words, are they using this as a crutch, and do you try to find what that is and then try to assist other people that would be in a position to assist them in not, or in solving that problem, therefore they wouldn't need it as a crutch?
Well, that's why we have, I would be happy if everybody knew what the resources are in their city, their state, their county, because this is what we have in Seattle, and no one person can answer so many different ways to so many different people. And so what we try to do is to get them to know where to get help, and to try to find out the reasons this is something.
But could you give us a few examples of things that you've run into that are really causing serious problems?
Alcohol.
Yeah, but other than in other words, isn't it possible that some individual has a very serious problem that's worrying them, and they may use alcohol or something else?
Surely this is true, but we have found out conclusively that if you remove the alcohol, this is the beginning. people may have many, many problems. I have seen people who recovered, and I wondered because they would have a jail hold on, their family had been destroyed. It was so they had no reason to live soberly, and they do. But we find once you remove the drinking, many of the problems automatically disappear, and over a period of time, whatever the other problems remain, they're able to cope with them better. Of course, we still feel that AA is the best source of help available of anything, but we do encourage people, whatever they will do, what kind of treatment they'll accept. And very often I have seen people in AA for a year, 2 years, and still a little unsettled, and then we would recommend another therapy. But removing the drinking is really the answer.
Jim
You can't
McLeod.
beat that.
Betty, you are an alcohol education specialist at the elementary level, and why do you feel it's so important to start with children at that age rather than, say, high school or junior high level? I know here, a district here in northern Idaho that I spoke to about this particular problem, they indicated to me that they wanted a program on alcohol education to be directed at the junior high school age rather than at the elementary ages. And this seems to be a commonly shared opinion on the part of many people, that this is the particular age level we need to start with. But as I understand it, you feel we need to start much earlier.
Well, I'd like to start in the delivery room. This is true. It is true. I have met with 700 school classes, and 9 of those included preschool classes. And I had worked with young children. I had done work with first grade and kindergarten. But when I first walked to a preschool class, I didn't know what to expect. And I found out it was amazing what they know about drinking. I have had women who said to me, "Gosh, I'm so glad my kids were so young they didn't know about my drinking." And I can remember saying, "Mary, the counselor said when she went to your house that your 4-year-old showed her where you hid your bottles." And the little ones, they know. Kids are educated by what goes on in the home, what is used, people's attitude about it, before they ever set foot in any classroom. Junior and senior year, we've missed the boat with them completely. I'm inclined this coming year to include 10th grade classes with knowledge about what goes on in their own state, what we're doing about alcohol, what we're trying to do, who's doing what, and how they're doing it, what we need to do.
Tim Christie.
What is your approach? I mean, we've talked about that where you try and get them. What kind of approach do you use to these people, and what approaches have you found to be successful?
Well, when I first walked into the classrooms, I thought it should be very orderly, one hand raised at a time, and their whole life is lectures, statistics, lectures, figures, papers they're supposed to do, and so it's suddenly evolved. And I decided if it was going to be theirs, it had to be theirs. So I never know how it's going to start out. I never know what we're going to talk about, really, whether it's going to be alcohol, the alcoholic alcoholism. Sometimes they want to tell me some very personal things, and that's okay. But in every classroom, there's always one who knows everything, and it's all wrong. And that is usually your starting point, and then the others shoot them down. And so over a period of time, it is their discussion, and it's theirs, and it's open, and all I have to do is to be interested and willing without any criticism, and I've more or less moderated to keep pulling it back to them, to have them question themselves. And so very often I'll have 10 people screaming at the top of their lungs. I've had principals come down from 2 floors up and see what in God's name is going on, but it's theirs. And they discuss freely and honestly. And it is theirs, and it's a learning process for both of us, really, but it does belong to them, and there aren't many things. You see, this world is so mobbed. I could take an hour on this. What can kids do to be individual? They don't even know they're an individual anymore. Everything they do, it's in such groups, bunches. Every place they go, everything they do. It's as though they really don't matter anymore. I think they've lost sight of that. And for somebody to really care what they think or what they have to say, evidently is the answer. And it doesn't work every time. I've been in classrooms where it was just ice, just frozen over completely, and there's nothing you can do, nothing except maybe talk a little bit and get out of there. But most of the time, they're delighted, and very often I hear from them later. In fact, one day I was in the university district, and one of these old rattletrap cars came down, and a bunch of kids in there, and the door flew open, and 2 beer cans rolled out, and one of the kids said, "That's my brother's, Mrs. Marsh."
Judy Silty.
Do Do you ever feel like you're just taking on the whole world? I mean, that there are so many kinds of anti-education out in the real world outside the school that you just can hardly counter it all with your time in the classroom?
No, because I see what has happened. We have a fantastic thing that has come about in Seattle with the public school service, District 121. We have almost 700 school teachers who are educated about alcohol. We have a book for each classroom. We have their baby bathtubs that we keep the material in for each classroom, the films, the material, everything that stays in the same place. There were 100 of us on the committee for 3 years to set this up. And I think it's the most exciting thing that has happened, and it's all been a little bit at a time. It's nice to be a part of it.
Well, I guess. I think that's great.
Jim McLeod.
Betty, what are some of the prevalent myths about alcohol use that you fight in the schools?
Oh, you should hear some of the kids. You know, my dad says everybody's got to throw up to grow up, or everybody's got to get drunk to learn how to drink. Same thing. Everybody should learn how to drink. You know, one kid telling me about his father, who's a salesman, says my dad wouldn't deal with anybody who doesn't drink because he says he's going to stay sober. You know, they do all their big deals over at a bar, of course. He said, now, if one person's going to stay sober in the first place, he wouldn't know how to deal with big business, you know, if he's that prissy and prim. And secondly, if he's going to stay sober and everybody else is drinking, he might pull a fast one on them. But it sounds silly, doesn't it? It sounds absolutely silly. But these are the things. This is prevalent. That everyone should be able to drink. You've got to know how to drink to get along in this world. And they see it every time they turn around. They see it.
I would think for boys in particular that this would be a rite of passage that many of them would go through. That part of your masculinity must be tied to this sort of thing.
Surely, and it's hard on them. And we come back to the same thing where they're right in the middle. Their family says don't drink. Maybe their family doesn't drink. Maybe they come from a background, an ethnic background that doesn't approve of it or considers it wrong. And all their dearest friends, you know, their closest friends are saying, oh, come on, don't be like that, you know. So, you know, what are they going to do? It is hard, sure it's hard. And so they're, again, to educate, you know, to know not only who's right and who's wrong. Now, that's ridiculous, it isn't wrong, but to know who they are and what's right for them. This is what we're after. And to, you know, we found out, or I found out a long time ago, by the time a kid's in 4th grade, I don't care what the home or the church or the school or the community tells them, they know it's going to be a personal choice what they use. And this is why exactly, to answer your question of long ago, we have to get to them before that time of choice so they know what they're choosing.
So it's consciousness that you're
right.
after.
Tim Christie.
Okay, you seem to be saying, Betty, that the school has some effect. Your programs, at least my perception is that you think that they're having an effect. What's the limit? I mean, what is the limit to what a school, a teacher, and education can do in relationship to alcohol education and to eliminate or minimize, repress, I guess, the problem of alcoholism among youth?
Well, this is one reason we had to start educating the teachers. You know, this is going backwards. I think it was 8 years ago that the Governor's Commission on Education, we were very proud, Father Royce and I were on the board that made alcohol education mandatory in the public school system in the state of Washington. The teachers get a miserable half credit, and then we found out nobody had ever educated the teachers, you know, which is, you know, catch-22. And so we have been doing catch-up for teacher workshops, and here again, no program can be successful in a classroom when a teacher objects to the subject or when she is uneasy about the subject. This is why we need to educate them. Okay. And very often, I admit, in a classroom, I will say, you know, I can tell how a classroom is now the minute I walk in. I can tell when I walk into a school what from the atmosphere. And I will say to a teacher, why don't you go have a cup of coffee? And sometimes the minute she leaves the room, it goes like that. And very often when they stay, it is absolutely rigid. So I agree with you. It has a lot to do with your teacher, but that's why we need them.
Okay. So you think the limit to what the schools can do is basically limited by what the teachers can accomplish?
Well, now, see, I can't speak for any other city or state, but in Seattle, the school system is so autonomous. You know, it is so widespread and far-flung, and so the teachers are really on their own. And very often, if you remember Don Phelps when he was in D.C. with NIAAA, And that was the first time that I met him. And he had been principal of a high school in Bellevue. And I was doing a program then, and he was there, and he said, gee, I wish you'd come to my school. I said, I was there 5 times. So, see, our teachers are autonomous, and it's really up to your teacher what they're going to do.
With that, I have to bring our program to conclusion. We're out of time. And Betty, I want to thank you very much for being with us for the past 2 weeks. It's been very informative. Ladies and gentlemen, we have brought you programs 7 and 8 under the grant from the Association for the Humanities in Idaho entitled Alcohol and Human Values. Next week, we will be dealing with a different topic that's not has anything to do with this particular grant or proposal. It'll be a guest that I think you'll enjoy. I hope you'll be with us at that time. Until then, have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.